My name is Kevin Cool. I first came to the Garryowen area in 1972 after I met Linda Ball. The following year, Linda and I were married, and I've been coming to Lake of Bays ever since, and always to Garryowen area.
I'm Christine Atkinson. My maiden name is Ball. In around 1902, my great-great-uncle Sher and great-great-aunt Elizabeth came to this property for their honeymoon, fell in love with it. From what I understand from what's been written, both their health was not terribly good, and they decided that rather than have a lot of doctors and medicines, they would come here and Mother Nature would be their nurse.
In the 1870s, I believe around 77 or so, Charles Brown was granted quite a bit of land from the government. And in 1902, Shirley Ball bought quite a bit of land from Charles Brown. In the middle of it, basically, he built Garryowen.
They moved back here and bought a farmhouse, and after a couple of years it burned down and they built this two-story log building.
That's basically the early beginnings of the cottage known now as Garryowen. Aunt Elizabeth wrote a lot of letters. She seemed to be an extremely well-educated lady because her writing was very, very well done. So among other things, she talked about the work that Sher did and how he would sometimes in the winter he would skate into Dorset to get the mail. And that's an interesting image.
Some of the things that Aunt Elizabeth describes in her letters is just amazing. She talks about having seen certain people's houses were on fire. And at that point, they were fortunate enough to have a phone so they could call it in when they had their fire here in Garryowen, and people from around the lake came and helped them, brought stuff that they needed. You know, it was quite the community.
Elizabeth, in a lot of her writings, really encouraged people to come and partake of nature's treasures. So they started getting guests, and my great-great-aunt Elizabeth would engage the guests by including them in doing the laundry on a washboard down by the shore. They'd have their dinners up here, and they had campfires, I know, and they used to recite poems and sing songs, and it was a different time. A lot of those guests ended up wanting to come back again and again, and eventually, over decades, some of those guests bought properties here, and a lot of those guests were actually family. So along this stretch of shore, there is a lot of family.
When Elizabeth Ball died, John and John's father did a lot to help Uncle Sher keep the place going. Garryowen became one of the Muskoka Lodge type of establishments. And when people came for the summer to stay, Uncle Sher was not an antisocial person, but he also didn't do well in crowds. So when the people would arrive to stay here, he would go and pitch a tent at the point just next door, about 100 feet from the place. It was at that place that John Ball built his cottage. He had a favorite connection with it because that was Uncle Sher's favorite place, so I think it became his favorite place.
And then Uncle Sher became very ill and died. My grandfather then owned this place, and he and my father were here a lot. So then my father had it after his father. He sold it to my cousin Crosby and Mary. They were here for 50 years, and they can be given credit for both developing that culture of keeping this just as it is and living by it. They never wanted to change anything, and we loved that.
My grandmother called her place when she built it Franny's Folly. Grandma considered this place kind of a magical place, for her. When Grandma built it, she did not want a lot of the extras, the modern extras. She wanted the outhouse and she wanted the hand pump. She agreed to have electricity. But other than that, she wanted it like when she was coming up here as a teenager, where there were the camps and they come to the main lodge for meals and that sort of thing. Grandma loved it up here. I mean, she was never happier than when she was here. When she passed, one of the first things that my mother did was put the addition on our place with the 2 bedrooms and the bathroom.
In the early to mid-50s, Muriel got a little tired of the older building, so she and John, they built a new cottage just a stone's throw from here on the point.
And I think the reason for that was that my mother found this place too big and too hard to manage to her standard. So they were in a home that was a little more modern, a little easier, a little smaller, and she was happier there. But they still had that link with Garryowen because Crosby and my dad had been best of friends when they were boys. Tragically, in about 2002, Crosby and Mary were in a car accident and died. It was just devastating. A few years later, Tom, that's Crosby and Mary's son, said he wanted me to take over Garryowen. So Jim and I took it over, and in spite of the fact that we appreciated the fact that it hadn't been changed much, there were some things that needed changing. There were rotten boards and rickety staircases. So we actually replaced the outside staircase that came off the ping pong room, and we tore up the kitchen, made the kitchen a little more usable for this time in our life. I took a power washer to the fireplaces and discovered there was beautiful pieces of quartz in there. So we always tried to replace everything and preserve the integrity of the building.
There are a number of places connected with the history of Garryowen on our property as well. The main one, I think, would be the wharf, which is quite a long wharf, legal non-conforming on the lake. It was built over 100 years ago. It was built out far because it had to come to a point where it was deep enough so that the Iroquois, the boat which traveled the lake, could dock.
The dock wasn't actually there at that time, so they came off in like little boats with everything up to the shore, emptied everything, took the boat back.
The Iroquois brought people to stay. It took away people who were going home. It brought supplies, it brought the mail, and so on. Alongside the wharf is quite a lovely beach, and it was actually the place where everyone who stayed at Garryowen would go for swim. That was the best swimming area as well. A little further down the shore, about 100 feet, is the original boathouse. It's a shore boathouse. It's still the original structure, but it's been recaptured and, if you will, supported, so it's quite sturdy and still quite functional.
At one point, long before we got this, we built a cottage on the campsite that my great-great-uncle Sher had retreated to when he just found life a little too busy. It was the place he could go to get away from the busy times here.
The other things on the property of historical note are there's an older cabin there, and that cabin was put together by some relatives who came to visit the Balls and wanted their own place. And so Sher just said, you can put it wherever you want over there. When Garryowen had visitors, there wasn't enough room in the lodge itself for everyone to sleep. So they built these little structures, they called them pagodas, and I think there were up to 10 or 11 at one time. Now there are 2 remaining.
Apparently they did have canvas drapes that they would use on a lot of the pagodas for sleeping. And it would be 2 cots and a washstand, and that would be it. Very, very simple and basic, rustic.
They were where people slept. Basically, that was their quarters. So they would sleep, change, rest in the day, and so on. Then they would all come to the lodge for meals.
My great-great-uncle and great-great-aunt Elizabeth had a lot of property along the shoreline here, and over a few decades sold off a lot of lots to different people that were interested.
Grandma built the place and she put it in my mother's name. She never really owned it herself, but she put it in Mom's name. So when Mom passed in 2008, it came to me. We have 2 boys, Jeffrey and Ben, and hopefully they like it as much as we do.
Crosby lived here for many, many years, and then eventually Garryowen was bought by Christine Atkinson, who was Linda's sister, and they lived here for a number of years, and now, of course, it's owned by Tyler and Megan, Tyler being Christine's son.
Lake of Bays has just been part of who I am. I think just like it was for my grandmother. She thought it was a magical place, and I think it is too.
As a child, I was always looking for a playhouse or a tree house or something. And one of the playhouses I found was just over here in the raspberry bushes. And it apparently was a cook shack, but it was a perfect playhouse, and I decorated it and had great times there.
When I was young, we used to run back and forth. There was a whole system of pathways behind all these properties, and we'd be running back and forth all the time. And it seemed like all the time somebody would say, okay, cocktails at our place at 5 o'clock, and everybody would go down to our place. Then the next one would be down here at Garryowen, and then the next one would be down at the Deacon's place. I think it would be fun to do that again, just say, come on down for drinks, and everybody show up via the pathways.
One time when I was here visiting Tom, and he had some guests, and this guest got so involved in the stories and just loved them so much, and I don't know if that is what made him see Great-Great-Aunt Elizabeth's ghost, or she was actually here. But he claims that he came down into this room and she was standing at that window looking out at her garden. I loved it. I loved the fact that he had embraced the story that much. Coming in here as a child, it was sort of like going into a museum, but also going into a place that was your hometown. The place that you were nurtured.
Not too many people can say that the people that they are seeing up along this shoreline are direct blood relations. We've come down so many generations now from Uncle Sure. Uncle Sure was the one that started all this. We're all his legacy, him and Aunt Elizabeth, and I wish I'd known them. I can't imagine not being here, not having this place to come to, and not having all the cousins and relatives around.
I have the privilege of being able to still be here. This is still family, and we have a very fond wish that it remain that way. And I think Tyler and Megan are committed to that as well.
I think that a lot of people just can't understand it unless you have something like this or you're very history-oriented. You just can't understand what it means to the people who can trace their property back through so many generations and have things from the original settlers about what it was like to live here when you didn't have electricity.
I would be asked as a child, where's your hometown? And I don't have a hometown because my father moved from place to place. We'd never be anywhere for more than 2 to 5 years. I believed that this was my hometown. This is where I had roots. And the longer I've experienced being here, the deeper and stronger those roots have become. So now it's really a place where family gathers. And I think it's become everybody's kind of hometown.
It's a very special place. Old Muskoka. You don't find this anymore.